Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Next week is the big alpha patch that is going to change quite a little bit in the game, I think, with alphas able to fly up to battleships, also use small and medium Tech 2 weapons. I think that will be a lot of demand for skill points and could have a pretty big impact on the economy in the game. That's why we're here, of course. We are here to look at the market, so let's get started on that. Let's go to the quick bar, take plex and stuff. That's going to be at 40 seconds, like that. And then let's set our filters correct so that, especially for the plex related items, which can be transported in full safety without even needing any cargo space, especially here the plex, you can do that through the plex vault, so that's a little bit different. You have to look at what's happening in the surrounding systems as well in the player owned trade hubs for these items. But I think the chart is pretty obvious. We have a very sharp takeoff of plex heading towards 3.5 million ISK. And in even the first seller is now above 3.5 million. 3,547,000 ISK for the sellers. If I do look at Jita, that was at 3,595, and that is practically equal to 1.8 billion ISK for 30 days game time. So a big difference with the microplex, as some people have called them for a while. With the division by 500 is that these increases in price here, it's 10% in about a week. It's a very sharp takeoff, but you don't notice it all that much on the price of an individual plex. It doesn't feel like we've gone from 1.5 or maybe like 1.65 billion to 1.8 billion just like that in a week, and 1.8 billion probably very close to the all-time high that we've reached here as well, which was apparently in late July. So another difference that I'm personally noticing is that you see lots less threads about this on Reddit, on the forums, about the plex price. So I basically do think that one aspect of dividing plex into 500 smaller plex has made this the inflation a little bit less visible for us. It was very easy to see, oh, 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion, 1.7, now 1.8 billion, what the hell is happening for 30 days game time. But going from 3.2 million to 3.5 million doesn't feel like it's that big of an increase. So the psychology here is definitely different when it comes to plex, but the result nonetheless is a massive increase in the price. I think that the culprit, if you want to call it that, will have been the in development video from CCP. There they again announced all the alpha changes, and I think that will have driven quite a bit of demand for plex, for skill points and for things like that, because obviously you can only train a smaller skill pool for free. After that, if you want to get into the battleship, if you want to get into the battle cruisers, cross train and things like that, you need to find a way of getting those skill points. So let's take a look at the multiple pilot training certificate. That one is coming off of a sale when as low as 1.2 billion, so it's on its way back up as well, but it's already up to 1.4 billion, still quite a bit cheaper than plex at the moment, and the buyers are at a little bit above 1.3 billion. The market, as you can see, is a lot smaller though. Next up we have the skill extractors. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise that we have this sharp increase as well, just like with plex, but we see a little bit of stalling at the tail end. That is quite interesting. So these are now selling for 347 million ISK in Jita Station at 355, and the buyers are at 36.5 million. So decently expensive skill extractors as well, especially if we look at the 1 year chart. The more interesting part for me, I think, is going to be the large skill injectors, and this is quite surprising to me. These have basically not moved. They're still at 790 million for the sellers, 780 for the buyers. Very narrow margin here, and no sharp increase in price visible just yet. Maybe I could see two possibilities for this. Number one, there's for some reason a delay in the response, and it's only once alpha clones realize in game themselves that that they need stuff like skill injectors that will see an increase in demand for that, or it's also possible that people don't expect alpha clones to go for these large skill injectors, but would rather stick to the new daily alpha injectors that CCP will introduce with the patch as well. And as a result, the increased price in plex makes sense, right? Because you'll want plex to convert in order to get those new injectors, but you don't necessarily need large skill injectors, which are also pretty pricey for an alpha clone. Of course, 800 million, you don't get by that just by accident either. And so as a result, we have this discrepancy for the first time, a really very noticeable discrepancy between the increased price of plex and the large skill injectors basically staying flat. Maybe the small skill injectors would go up a little bit, but nope, they're also pretty much flat here. I thought maybe those might be interesting because the price range is of course a little bit different. Price range here is 158 million to 154 for the buyers, so again very narrow margin, but I would feel like this is actually a bit more affordable for an alpha clone, something to work towards, a nice goal if they want some extra skill points towards battleship or whatever it is that they want. Then something like a small skill injector could actually, I think, be something that they'll work towards. So if you believe that like I do, perhaps there is a small investment opportunity in the small skill injectors, but the market is especially looking at plex themselves at the moment. Next up, we are going to take a look at some minerals at 645, let's say. There we go. And you probably already saw from the ticker that that is not good news. I thought we were forming a bottom when at least some of them were starting to push back up, such as titanium. Unfortunately, increased volumes, lower prices, so the dumping continues. Any sell opportunity basically, here we get close to 5 is getting snuffed out by people that are just waiting for that opportunity to get rid of the mineral stocks that they have lying around. And as a result, we are now back down to 469 for the sellers, and the buyers are coming in at 455 around Cheetah. So again, well below 5 ISK, very cheap titanium, and not really too good news for high-sec miners. The fact that we managed to get to 5 ISK and then we get squashed down by increased supplies like that does indicate that, well, there is either too much supply or too big stocks available, or of course there's not enough destruction happening in the game. It's always going to be a mix of all these elements, but I basically think that at the moment a little bit of a lack of destruction is the name of the game. Next up here we've got pyrite, and that is just continuing to go down. Of course, if you're starting to dump titanium, then you'll be dumping some other stuff as well, and that is at a 1-year low point now. Pyrite selling for 469, which is the same price as titanium, and the buyers are coming in at 442. I think that's worse. Yeah, that's worse than titanium. So basically pyrite, which is I think lower in volumes when you mine for that than if you would mine for titanium, is actually cheaper than titanium. You of course need less of it as well in most things that you produce, but this is completely crazy. This is basically the inverse situation of what you would normally expect, at least from the miner perspective. So next up here we've got Mixlon, or One Hope. At least that one is managing to maintain a price of just below 65 ISK. It's trying to stem the tide here a little bit. 64.48 for the seller, 62 ISK for the first buyer coming in. This is still your go-to mineral if you're mining in high sec and you can focus on a source of these. You definitely want to grab that. Next up, Isogen. That's, well, it's stalling as well, but it's stalling at a 1-year low price point, so that is not good news either. And Isogen is currently selling for 41.90. Buyers are coming in at 39.05, and this is also an inverse situation between Isogen and Mexlon, because for, let's say, an hour of mining specifically for Isogen or an hour of mining specifically for Mexlon, you're gonna get more Mexlon in your cargo hold than you're gonna get Isogen. Of course, you can't mine directly for that. You have to mine for ores, but I think you understand what I mean. Normally, you would suspect that we have such a lower supply of Isogen compared to Mexlon, just naturally, that the price of Isogen would be higher than Mexlon, but that's not the case. anymore, which is really strange because this is quite a lot, right? Mexilon going for 65, Isogen on average going for less than 45 is quite a difference between the two, and still it should be easier to get bigger stocks of Mexilon than of Isogen. So yeah, it's not a great time in the mineral market. Same with Noxium here. After trying to get back to 325, it's basically being squashed once again back towards a 1-year low point. Not yet, but at 290 and here at 303 on average, we are getting very close to that. 323 ISK for the sellers, 301 ISK for the buyers, just above 300 ISK. If those guys manage to push the price back down below 300, look out below, we might actually get to a 1-year low again. For an investment opportunity, this looks like an interesting time to jump into some Noxium, but I personally do think that we need to basically see some serious conflict in nullsec before that can actually make us some ISK. Then on the nullsec front, it's more of the same as well. So it's just across the board, which I think is an indication that they're just across the board. People have the opportunity to mine in all impunity, and that there is just not enough conflict happening to absorb all of these supplies. And Zytrine also working towards a 1-year low at less than 1000 ISK. 941 for the sellers here in Jita Station, 886 for the buyers of Zytrine. Very, very cheap once again, especially historically speaking. And then Megasite is doing the same thing, although a little bit more slowly, staying above 1000 ISK, but not by much anymore, I don't think. 1048 for the sellers, 970 for the buyers. The buyers are trying to drive the price back down. That doesn't always work for nullsec minerals, it has to be said. It's usually the sellers that do dictate the price of these, but we can also see increased volumes, lower prices. So there is definitely more of this coming to the market. Here on this high point, you can see that the volumes were much lower, and if you take a look at the Zytrine here as well, we do clearly see increased volumes, and here at this high point we see some decreased volumes. That is normally a sign of decreased supplies, because it is the sellers that tend to dictate the price. So here volumes are a very strong sign of supply, but that's something that's decently unique to nullsec minerals. And finally, we also have Morphite that is just crashing down as well. It's actually, I think, going to become pretty interesting to pick some of that up. 8380 for the sellers, 8150 for the buyers, and it's just a couple of them. And now here we head towards 8000 ISK, which, I mean, this to me would be a no-brainer. If we come into play at this 890, that's just 1000 units. If we get below that, then it's just a no-brainer. I will start to invest in some Morphite. But on this chart again, 1-year low point at this point, so you might actually want to pick some up at around 8150 if you're looking for a Morphite investment. I might actually do that, not for too much, but this is obviously a general crashing of the mineral market, prices going down substantially. If you have other explanations, feel free to post those in the comments, but my personal gut feeling here is saying that it's just a lack of conflict at the moment. Next up, let's take a look at PI at 1330. There we go. Let's start as always with some broadcast nodes, and these are basically settling back at slightly above the previous average, but not by much anymore. 2.2 million for the sellers, 2.1 million for the buyers. Definitely coming back into a reasonable price range here, and these are of course needed for structures for refineries. So for me, this is very good news. I think that at this point I can try to start buying up some of these in order to get started on a next refinery, so that for early next year I am ready, just in case CCP decides to give 0.5 systems that moon mining option. Construction blocks next, pretty much staying decently flat around the average of 12,000 ISK, I would say on the chart. 12,400, 350 actually for the sellers, 11,235 for the buyers. I would say, yep, sellers around average, buyers maybe a bit below average, but at this point I wouldn't blame you if you hold on to your construction blocks, of course. if you do sell them, of course, have the patience to put up a sell order. Consumer electronics next, also pretty much flat, maybe a little bit below average if you look at the entire chart, but this can also be considered a normal price range. If you look at everything except for this higher price range of around 15,000 ISK, which is quite expensive, selling for 12,000, buyers are at 10,500. Here again, sellers looking okay, but you might want to hold off if you have the patience for that. Buyers probably below average at this point, so you might want to consider some buying. 10,500 is definitely at the lower end of the chart. Coolants next, that here is meandering at a very low price point below 10,000 ISK as well. I've done a couple of purchases of this, 9,740 for the sellers, 9,300 for the buyers. Especially on the entire chart, this is some very cheap coolant. One thing to keep in mind, of course, this is related to fuels, and we already know from CCP's numbers and their attempt to increase the demand for ICE products that basically the refinery, the new way of moon mining, has lowered the demand for fuel. Next up you get enriched uranium, in the same boat of course, also tied to fuels. And 12,700 for the sellers. I'd say that's actually an okay price, but the buyers at 11,800, you know, a little bit below average here. Although on this entire chart again, it's closer to 15,000 ISK for an average price, but I don't think that that's actually very representative. We've had a pretty crazy summer sometimes. Here again, right, June, July, August, that very high point seems to actually be a recurring theme. I remember last year we had something very similar. So if you have that long horizon, and if maybe you're hoping that CCP by next summer might start to come out with some information on, for instance, next set of structures, the new Stargate, things like that, then of course this chart looks really good if you want to start some investments in PI for the longer term. I would definitely not blame you for that. If you look at enriched uranium here, less than 12,000 ISK. Look at the entire chart. We've not been there very often, and so if next summer we can have a bit of something that's in line with the hypes that we've known this time towards new structures, who knows, this could actually be an interesting time to buy, of course. Integrity response drones next. This is directly related to the construction of structures. 2.6 million for the sellers, 2.5 million for the buyers. Again, still a little bit of a premium on the price before all the hype of the refineries themselves, but in a reasonable price range. Mechanical parts next, meandering below 10,000 ISK as well. Buyers at 9,300. Here again, fuel related, so very cheap, but potentially a good time to pick some of those up. Nuclear reactors next. This was definitely a specialized PI material that is needed to produce these advanced ones for structures, and you can see that big jump up to 180,000 ISK, quite substantial. We went back to less than 100,000 in no time, so this one is a great one for active trading. It does move very often in a very reasonable amount as well. 90,000, and in here back up to 120,000, and now back down already to 90,000. So at the moment, nuclear reactors selling for 114,000, but the buyers are at less than 90,000. I would actually be willing to put up a buy order here as well. There's just a lack of demand, which of course is because there's probably a lack of extra demand for the advanced PI materials as well, and as a result people just don't need that many nuclear reactors at the moment, but it could be the time to stock up on them, of course. Robotics next, fuel related, below 90,000 ISK. We haven't seen that very often, just a little bit less than that for the first seller. 88,300 for the buyers. Narrow margin, but obviously at a 1-year low point as well, or very close to it. Self-harmonizing power cores, again look at the June-July price or a little bit before that. Sometimes we manage to hit 2 million, so we're paying a little bit more than that, but it's selling for 2.3 million, buyers are at 2.2 million, definitely in the reasonable range once again. Superconductors next, I would say just a little bit below average, but not by too much. 12,500 for the sellers, right around average. 11,300 for the buyers, a bit below that. So in general, for the non-specific ones, stuff that is not directly tied to the production of structures, and stuff that's not directly tied to, which is a little bit above average, stuff that's not directly tied to fuel, which is probably close to 1-year lows at the moment. The rest is like around average. The sculptures next, a little bit above that, because you do need that for structure construction. 9,200 for the sellers, 8,300 for the buyers. That margin is clearly widening, so we can expect this to continue to fall back to a price closer to 8,000 ISK. Wetware mainframe next, here again, June, July, you have a low point close to 2 million, but 2.2 million is probably a normal price. Sellers 2.4, buyers 2.25, a little bit above that, but not by too much anymore either. So PI is settling quite nicely, and personally, if you have that longer horizon, I do think that you can start to look for some buys as well. Next up, we have our Tech 1 chips that is at 2025. Okay, we're making good time today, and I don't think that this will be all too special either, because we have seen that once again all the minerals in general are very much under pressure, so special stuff needs to happen, which does happen from time to time, but otherwise we can expect a Tech 1 market that's under pressure as well price wise. Here is the apocalypse, and something that does tend to happen, we see the chart go below 150 million ISK, and we see an increased volume such that the price increases, which is a sign of course that someone, a bigger group usually, or an investor decides to purchase quite a few apocalypses, and as a result the price shoots up to 160. But the bad news is it stops here, and then it's probably going to start going down already. 162 for the sellers, 148 for the buyers. It is a battleship, takes a little bit more time for the market to respond to that, but here we do have a buyout of a cheap apocalypses happening about a week ago. The Caracal next, still staying well below 10 million. I am quite surprised that we don't see an increased volume at these prices. 9.2 million for the sellers, 8.6 million for the buyers. Very, very cheap Caracals, and I would personally have thought that by now someone would have bought, let's say, at least all Caracals below 9.6 million or something like that. It's a decent amount, and it's definitely for a pretty low price. I think it's gonna happen at some point. The Catalyst next, pretty flat here, staying above 1 million, so that one is actually doing okay, I would say, in the general context of things. 1.18 million for the sellers, 1 million for the first buyer. Someone is willing to buy 2,200 Catalyst for some reason. Perhaps the Imperium is planning for another burn Jita or something like that, because that is definitely a sizable buy order here. Next up, we have the Drake going to 1 year low point, pretty much close to that, at 42.8 million for the sellers, 39 million for the buyers. Very cheap Drakes here again. I would not be surprised if an actual buyout would happen of at least some of them, let's say up to 45 or maybe even 47.5 million. You can pick up quite a few Drakes for that price range, and that would be quite okay, especially those at 42.8, 43 million are actually pretty damn cheap, historically speaking. Ferox next, also here, so especially the battle cruisers do seem to be struggling with this with these low mineral prices, because even an increased volume here up to 304 of them in a day, which is like 3 times the normal volumes, hasn't had a noticeable impact on the price. Ferox selling for 47.8 million, buyers at 41 million. There's still a wide margin here as well, and it's just not going anywhere despite these really cheap ships on the market, and despite the fact that Alpha clones will also be able to fly these. I basically do think that part of it may be if I remember my own playstyle, I did jump into a battle cruiser. I took a look at the Brutix, didn't like it that much, didn't feel all that strong, and I took a look at the Myrmidon, but from there to a battleship was a pretty small jump up, and I just went straight for the Dominic. So I do think that in general, if an Alpha clone is going to commit to getting into those bigger ships, they're just gonna shoot straight for the battleship, and that the interest in the battle cruiser because of that may not be so high. Hurricane next, also down 1 year low, pretty up, is still in lockstep, going down, currently selling for 42.4 million, buyers at less than 40 million, coming in at 39 million, so you are definitely able to pick up some cheap Hurricanes, in contrast to Tech 2 ships, let's say. Megatron next, also here, look at that, not a 1 year low point just yet, but clearly just going straight through 150 million, is selling for 149, buyers are at 137, very cheap again, but this is the mineral price that you're starting to see show the signs of coming into the Tech 1 market, where, well, just to have the same margin as before, you can sell them cheaper, and that's basically what's happening. The Merlin next, also starting to be under pressure a little bit, despite the fact that it's a frigate that usually doesn't feel that mineral price that much because you don't need so many. It is going down though to less than 400,000 ISK, or it's more immediate on frigates as well. The Oracle next, again also working on that 1 year low point, especially if this is true, 63 million. It is selling for Oracle 66.7 million, but the buyers are at buyers are at 62 million, and if a couple of those trigger, then of course that is going to keep pushing the price of Oracles back down. The Raven doesn't look good either, pretty damn cheap, 147 million for the sellers. That is very cheap for, in my opinion, an awesome ship and an awesome looking ship as well. Let's put a headhunter skin on that. Just look at that. Just crazy good, and less than 150 for a seller, and there's decent amount of those for less than that price. 136.6 million for the buyers. Very cheap battleships as well. Retriever. Is it going back up to 25 million? Yeah, 25 for the sellers, 20 million for the buyers. That is interesting. Increased volumes, so some interest in buying some retrievers. I wonder, maybe it is like some moon mining operations that are coming online. That is definitely possible. Another possibility, maybe that the resource wars are still causing people to buy up these types of ships. I don't know. I really haven't been able to spend time in resource wars just yet. It's more of a group thing, of course. You do want, once you get past tier 1, you do want to have a small group with you, and so that's not exactly my favorite playstyle in EVE. I'm more of a solo player myself, but I may need to try and get that going, perhaps with my brother if we can get online a little bit, build a couple of ships for resource wars and see how far we can push with a couple of guys. The Tempest next, another battleship, actually going up in price on massive volume increase just today. So let's say 150 million before what happened, now selling for 162, buyers at 135. So this is a classical example, and it apparently happened just yesterday, where all of a sudden from like around 20 a day, people have bought 80 Tempest, so they cleaned everything out, let's say below 162 million. As a result, we do have a price that is shooting up a little bit. This gap will get plugged very quickly though. Don't see this as an opportunity where you can now buy a Tempest blueprint and then slowly build those up or something like that. Nope, this will get plugged very quickly. The Thrasher next, a little bit like the Catalyst, staying above 1 million, so doing alright actually. A little bit above 1 million here, buyers for less than 1 million though. Next up here we've got the Tornado, close to 1 year low point, once again selling for 59 million ISK, buyers are at 55 million. I would not be surprised if there a buyout happens here at some point as well. Tristan next, actually slightly going up in price, currently selling for 486,000 ISK, so it's a great little frigate. I personally do like it. If you want a frigate that you can buy, let's say a dozen of them, quickly fit them and then risk them in low sec for whatever activity you want, I think it's a great little ship for that. 5 small drones, pretty damn amazing. The Venture, a little bit under pressure after reaching a plateau here, which I would say was due to the resource wars. I think things might be settling down, especially on the tier 1 stuff. Why would you keep doing that if you have the capabilities of running tier 2, tier 3 and up? So as a result, I think interest is dropping a little bit. 238,000 for the sellers, 213 for the buyers, a little bit under pressure. And finally we have the Vexor, coming close to 1 year low point as well, well below 10 million, 9.2 million for the sellers, 8.8 for the buyers. Again, very cheap Tech 1 ships. That's just the name of the game. If we have very cheap minerals, some of them hitting 1 year low points, and we're oversupplied on that front, then the Tech 1 market is going to suffer from that as well, of course. Next up, the Tech 2 market at 29 minutes. There we go. So here what we are basically waiting for is for an actual sign that moon mining has found its ground and what that means for the Tech2 market. And here for the Aries, it does not look too good because we were looking at around 35 million for an Aries before. Sellers are now up to almost 40 million, buyers are at 34 million. And so this is a first sign that, well, the new normal price of Tech2 ships is way higher than before. And I have to be honest, from just an objective or my attempt at an objective perspective, I think that this may not be a bad thing. Tech2 faction was really becoming just the doctrine. Nothing else was flown in nullsec anymore. And if through changing moon mining, through changing the cost of production of those faction ships, you manage to increase their prices, perhaps you could bring the Tech1 market back into the meta a little bit. But that does mean that some of those big groups have to wean off of the best possible, and that's not easy to do. As a result, maybe they're also becoming less risk averse with these far more expensive ships and fleets, and so how all of this plays out is very difficult to say, but I would say that here for the Aries, this is the first sign that maybe 35 million and a little bit below that would be a buy opportunity, and that the jumps up in price will be to 40, 45, maybe even 50 million on a big war for an interceptor. So that's the first sign here that this might be the name of the game. We are talking a couple of months since the increase in price. Some of this is due to speculation, but by now, of course, the new moon mining mechanics should be up and running and should be basically doing their thing in the economy. Let's see what the Cerberus is doing. Is still holding on at that high plateau, of course, but no real sign of this going anywhere. It's a little bit more tricky to say exactly from the Cerberus, but I'm expecting 270 for the sellers, 250 for the buyers, of course, just very expensive. The Claw next. Oh, here again, this is going to be pretty damn interesting because the Claw is actually jumping down to 30 million ISK. Sellers are at 30.6, buyers are at 27. And here the question is, if we look at both the Claw and the Aries, what will happen next? Will the Aries jump back down, maybe overshoot a little bit at 35, and then continue to basically meander around this price range? And does that mean that the Claw here is actually a buy opportunity at 30 million, or is this the first sign that the exact opposite is happening? More and more moon mining is coming online, supply chains are coming back, and as a result we're actually going to get closer to a previous average of these Tech2 ships. So that is still the game that is being played here, I think, and the question that if you're looking for those investment in Tech2 ships, well, the Claw might be an investment if you believe that the Aries is showing that the new normal is actually this current price range. And that does make it very interesting, but also very risky, of course, because the exact opposite could be happening, and anyone buying these Aries for 35 to 40 million are actually paying a very expensive ship that is going to end up costing less. If the Claw is actually an indication that there's more moon mining stuff coming to the market and more production capabilities. So it's gonna be interesting. Here is the Crow actually starting to show a seesaw pattern around 35 million here, currently selling for 34.9 million. Buyers though at 29 million. They want to push the price back down. Interesting stuff. The Crusader pretty much flat, a little bit below 35 million ISK, 32 for the sellers, 30 for the buyers. This one decently stable, so it's definitely a very mixed picture. Heretic though, after reaching 80 million, is now coming back down decently substantially. 66 for the sellers, 42 for the buyers. This is clearly an indication that maybe the market was a little bit overconfident in how high a price it could demand. The real question is, will we continue to maybe seesaw down? Will we find a relatively stable stretch at some point and then start to shoot up and see speculation there? Yeah, it's a very tricky one to do, but the Heretic definitely lost from 80 million on the seller side to 66 million. That is quite a sharp drop off and should be an indication of a nice increase in supply. The Hound next. Here, this Stealth Bomber, I think, is pretty flat at 35 million, holding strong. 34.3 million for the sellers, 32 for the buyers. Decently narrow margin compared to some of the others, and no real sign of which way are we going to go. So here maybe people are waiting. The Ishtar, after reaching a one-year high of almost 330 million, is also falling back a little bit, but not really showing any signs of going back to the 200 million it was before. 278 for the sellers, 255 for the buyers. And the charts, yeah, around 280. So this will actually probably drop back down even more by next week. The Manticore though, 1 year high. So that it is definitely a very, very mixed picture in the Take 2 market at the moment. 41 million for a stealth bomber. Pretty damn crazy. 35 million for the buyers. This is extremely expensive, and this one would of course indicate that 35 million would be an average price. Anything below that a buy opportunity, and then 45 million as sell opportunities could be in the books for the Manticore. The Nemesis next, also coming off of a 1 year high, actually managed to reach 45 million currently, back down to 36.4 million. So there must be some strong speculation happening as well, especially if you look at this 89, 88 in the last couple of days. Quite a few of them have been brought to the market. Pontifex next, holding strong at the 1 year high point, selling for 87 million. Buyers are at 80 million. Very, very expensive ship. And then here we've got the Purifier also coming back down from that high point. Currently selling for 39, buyers are at 35. Raptor also going down, breaking 35 million. I think sellers down to 34.5, buyers are at 31 million. Yep, this one is a little bit different again, showing slight increase in supply here. The Saber, also pretty importantly, just breaking straight to 70 million, settling at around 65.5, 66 for the sellers, 58 for the buyers. Buyers, yeah, they keep trying to push that back down. Hey, don't you guys have more ships for us? We're not gonna just pay crazy prices forever here. Then we've got the Stiletto. That one is just recovering from another spike at 40 million, but already back down to 34.8 million, buyers are at 31.5. The Stork also going down on increased volumes, I would say, so that is interesting. That could be decent supply. Was selling for 90, currently selling for 89. And the buyers are at 77. A little bit of a strange ones. Maybe increased volume. Yeah, actually it's 100 here. So that is quite odd to me, that 100 of them got traded and that then the price actually goes down after that, and that the supply is definitely not like 100 stronger or anything like that. So the Stork, a little bit strange. These command destroyers are currently extremely expensive, I would say. And then we've got the Taranis here. That one is just pretty much a flat below 35, 33.8 for the sellers, 30.6 for the buyers. So the Take 2 market is still very difficult to gauge, and it does make it very interesting, but also very risky, of course. And what I find interesting is, for instance, the difference between the Ares and the Claw. Exact opposites in these interceptors. That is pretty crazy. Then of course you have where was this Manticore stealth bomber, crazy 1 year high point here, selling for 41 million. That's just double the price that you would normally pay for a stealth bomber. That is pretty damn crazy. And then I think it was the Hound that was just meandering at 35 million. So you've got this big discrepancy between many of these ships. I still think that it could go either way. We could really find a new normal trade range, 35 million for frigates, and anything up that is a great sell opportunity, below that a buy opportunity, or we could still substantially go back down in general as supply manages to increase. Quite interesting, but I'm still not out of it. Next up we have the Take 3 market at 37.50. There we go. As always, we'll start with the destroyers. Let's take a look at what the Confessor is doing. A little bit under pressure again, going below 50 million, I think. 45 million for the sellers, 44 for the buyers. 157 coming in as the latest sell order. Here, that does look like a slight oversupply problem. How long will it be sustained? I'm not sure, of course. I would say that with these very expensive Take 3 ships, what you might Take 2 ships, what you might actually see is that the Take 3 doctrines will be bought by alliances a lot more. So we'll have to see if the price again reaches, let's say, close to what we're seeing now here, 45 million. If you see another big volume increase pushing the price back up to 60 million, that would mean that we know that the meta has shifted after going from I would say faction ships, right? You've got definitely like the carrier fleets that will still be a stable, but also Tech 2 ships. Cerberus was definitely a doctrine. Interceptors is a doctrine. They might just have said, all right, you know what, we're gonna move to Tech 3 ships next. Screw those Tech 1 ships. They can stay where they are in the gutter. Very cheap minerals, very cheap prices. Let the Alpha Clones bother with those. We are going to go Tech 3 crazy, and that would be, in my opinion, happen if we see another buyout and another jump up with this increased supply right here. And thus, as a result, the oversupply here might be a slight buy opportunity. It's gonna be difficult to say beforehand, but that might be happening. So the Confessor down in price on pretty decent supplies here. 45 million for the buyers, 44 for the first for the seller, sorry, 44 for the first buyer, 41 almost 42 for the next one. If you can pick up something in between here after this one gets bought out, could actually be pretty damn good. Hecate next, also going down in price below 50. Look at supply here, 20, 30, 10, 39, and the latest one, 45 million. I'm selling 100 of them. That again is an indication that, you know, there is really a decent supply of these Tech 3 ships. I do wonder if Nullsec is gonna jump on those opportunities. Next up here we got the Jackdaw. Also obviously slightly under pressure, going below 50 million, and here again 120, another 194 at 45 million coming in. So there's definitely something happening on the supply side here that is driving the price back down, and again we'll see if they find the customers in Nullsec, and if that pattern starts to show up, then we of course as investors could potentially take advantage of that as well. And then finally we've got this Vapor that actually shot up to more than 50 million and is already back down. A big volume increase and an indication that probably that's what might be happening, because here 48 million, that's probably some relisting happening as well. There is decent supply of course, but we are currently selling for 48.5 million. Buyers are at 39 million. So here you can see that pretty wide margin, and we take off around 40 million. So I would say that I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually a big buy happening here. Part of it for Nullsec, maybe part of it for release. This actually looks like a relisting at higher prices, to be honest. Yeah, we'll have to keep a close eye on that. There is lots of supply starting to form in these tactical destroyers this week. Let's take a look at the cruisers. Here is the Legion taking off in price quite substantially, up to 200 million ISK, 185 now for the sellers. So they have been, yeah, driving the price back down immediately as well. 173 for 185 million ISK, and then 160 for the buyers. Looks a lot like relisting again here as well, rather than a big Nullsec purchase. Interesting. Next up we have the Loki, staying at 230 to 20, yeah, maybe 200. Yeah, let's see here. That's interesting here. So 200 million for the sellers, 191 for the buyers, but 39 of them coming in at 193 million. We'll see if it's enough. I wouldn't say that that's massively oversupplied, but it's definitely going to keep the price in check a little bit below the 200 million mark. So interesting to see here again. It's not as uniform as amongst the destroyers though. Next up here we got the Proteus. After reaching, no, that's just an anomalous data point. So we are basically decently flat for the Proteus. 140 million for the sellers. Supply wise, here's 320 of them coming in. Here's another 100 coming in. That does look like a lot of supply to me. 128 million for the buyers. And here we also have the Tengu that is under pressure at 150. Supply wise 168, 120 here again. So 150 for the sellers, 139 for the buyers. Definitely affordable Tengus, I would say here. But then that Legion spike, to me, I'll be honest, with this here, it looks a lot like a relisting of ships rather than a Nullsec purchase. But on the Confessor side of things here, this drop off and this increase in price, that I think is an indication of more of purchasing than relisting. So on the other hand, we do have lots of supplies amongst many of these ships. Be careful for the oversupply situation, but if Nullsec does take an interest in these, then these might actually form buy opportunities as well. Very interesting situation in the Tech 3 market here. Definitely one to look out for. If the Tech 2 market doesn't start to show its pattern and we keep having a very difficult time calling potential buy opportunities, we might have a better time of it in the Tech 3 market. And then finally, for the extra product this week, I'm gonna take a look at the large industrial ship. Someone requested the Orca. I'm gonna take some freighters and stuff like that with it as well. And that's going to be at 43.55. So there we go. Not sure which categories these are, so we are just going to straight up look for the Orca. Ships, Orca. There we go. What are we seeing here? Orca, Tech 1, I think you just need lots of minerals to produce that. Selling for 780 million, buyers are at 710 million ISK. And a little bit under pressure here at the tail end. We're coming from way worse here. We're coming from 900 million around a year ago. Is that Ascension? I think that's Ascension. Ascension speculation probably, because then the Orca got changed. Before it was really only a support ship. That is where the Orca got its drones. Its drone power, so that it could actually compete with stuff like the Machina. And as a result here, now after a while of course, supply started to increase. We're down to 700 million, mineral prices went down, so this went down in price as well. And here there's not that much to say actually. 750 million on average for an Orca is, in my opinion, very affordable. And if you're someone that is solo mining, and especially if you want to just do that in high sec, you know, to have a quiet time, that's the way I do it, then you can definitely consider the Orca as your goal. I think it's an absolutely great ship for solo mining. It has the yield, but it also has the tank, and it has that massive ore bay, which means that, you know, you can have your 1, 2, 3 hour session and just be in that belt, suck it dry, and bring those minerals home. I absolutely love it, and it's definitely not crazy in price at the moment. So let's also see if we can find some freighters. I think that's under capital ships, and then we have freighters. Yep, so let's take a look at these. Here is the Providence, also Tech 1 freighter. So I think that you just need minerals for those. We can check, I think, on the industry tab. Let's do that. Requirements, industry. So you need these parts, and then these parts are just made from minerals, nothing else. So basically these are mineral sinks. 1.3 million, up a little bit in price, the Providence, but sellers are coming in at 1.2, 1.1 million. So I think that this spike is actually going down already. And again, you know, for a freighter, I think that this is actually an okay price. Let's take a look at the Charon here. Currently selling for a little bit more than that, 1.2 billion. A little bit less availability, buyers are at below 1.2, but this doesn't feel crazy or out of line. There's definitely a big impact from the mineral prices as well. Here is the Obelisk, this one that I own, 1.2 billion for the sellers, 1.1 billion for the buyers. A little bit of an upswing here at the tail end, but it's already recovering from that basically. Then we have the Fenrir here. That's actually pretty cheap. I like the look of the Fenrir, right? Definitely very reminiscent of that Star Wars on the planet there. Not sure what they're called, the little guys there where the droids get sucked into. But apparently Fenrir, 1.2 billion for the sellers and a little bit above 1 billion for the buyers. You might actually pick that one up more cheaply than some of the others. And then of course we also have the Bowhead itself, 1.2 billion, and going down in price, actually decently cheap. I bought mine for like 3 billion I think back when they were first introduced, but yeah, 1.25 billion for the sellers, 1.1 billion for the buyers. So for these massive transport ships, a little bit over a billion. Just like the Orca, it's actually in a very affordable range in my opinion. But we will look at the jump freighters as well, of course, and that could be different. That is definitely different. Used to cost 7 billion, now costing 10 billion. That is of course the moon mining changes and the Tech 2 ship problems showing through here. 10.5 billion for the sellers, 9 billion for the buyers. Very, very expensive at the moment. Arc does look just absolutely amazing. Let's take a look here at the Rhea. Selling also 10 billion, so this is like a 25% increase in price because of the moon mining changes. Selling for 10.4 billion, 9.7 billion for the buyers of the Rhea. Now here we've got the Anshar next, 11 billion for the sellers. That is very expensive. 11 billion for the sellers, 10 billion for the buyers. There's just, yeah, that's the Tech 2 market on like the bigger Tech 2 ships. Here it's a much more sustained effect. And again, the Minmatar willing to sell at a little bit of a discount, 10 billion for the sellers, but a little bit less than 9 billion for the buyers of the Nomad. So those are the transport ships. Quite interesting, of course, to see this big discrepancy between Tech 1 and Tech 2. Tech 2 is very expensive at the moment, and until the Tech 2 market in general settles down a little bit from the moon mining changes, they might remain that expensive. This might actually be CCP's goal in the end, you know, pay a little bit more for those Tech 2 ships. They are more powerful, they are better, so we don't want every Omega just flying around only in Tech 2 ships because everyone can afford them and they're crazy cheap. That would just basically, you know, probably not be the situation that they want, especially with the alpha characters in game at the moment. And so as a result, Tech 2 is very expensive compared to what it used to cost before. But the Tech 1 versions of these, the Orca and the Tech 1 freighters, I personally feel like they're quite doable. And if you want to make those your first goal, because you're more of a high-sec player, I would definitely say that you can do that and you can buy them, risk them. It's not that big a deal if you lose a 750 million ISK Orca. It's less than half a 30-day plex if you want to compare it to that. So, yep. These very good suggestion. I do like it, but there is nothing all too out of line to spot in these larger ships either. That's going to be it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.